Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 346, and today's guest is Scott Weller, CTO and co-founder at EnFi. The formula for a thriving tech ecosystem ideally looks something like this. Entrepreneurial-minded person works for startups and learns a ton. Perhaps they even witness success at scale to an exit. Said person takes lessons learned and builds their own company to an exit. Said person then starts to mentor and invest back into the ecosystem to fund the next generation of companies. Said person eventually finds an idea that they can't get out of their head and launches another company. Well, this is the case for Scott, as he was involved in tech from an early age and connected with a talented group of entrepreneurs who were building the first generation of online gaming, where he witnessed a couple of exits. He then co-founded and was the CTO of SessionM, which led to a successful exit to Mastercard. He then was angel investing and advising companies, where he and another successful entrepreneur, that being Josh Summers, saw a problem which was a perfect opportunity to disrupt an industry using AI. Josh, if you're not familiar with him, has the same startup founder pedigree, as he was part of the Ware team that was acquired by PayPal and then went on to found Clipped, which was acquired by Xandr. The two have come together to build a company called EnFi, which recently announced $7.5 million in seed funding led by Unusual Ventures with participation from Boston Seed, Argon Ventures, and Impellant Ventures. EnFi is accelerating complex credit analysis and risk monitoring with AI assistance for bank and private lending origination, underwriting, and portfolio management teams. In this episode of our podcast, we cover a lot of great topics, like a discussion about the AI landscape in the Boston tech scene, Scott's background story, and his early involvement with one of the very first internet service providers called Intellicom Data Systems as a teenager, working at an early stage web gaming startup called Gamesville, which was acquired by Lycos, game logic and the early innovation of working with regulated games, and the level of innovation in terms of patent creation, which was acquired by Scientific Games, being early to market with an online video product for SMBs called SnapYap that he started with others, the founding story of SessionM with Mark Herman and Lars Albright, and how the company evolved through the years, plus its acquisition by Mastercard and how things materialized post-acquisition, SessionM's involvement in building the very successful mobile app for Starbucks and its bonus and loyalty campaigns, the background story and all the details about EnFi and how they are disrupting the market, common startup mistakes that he sees entrepreneurs make over and over again, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. If you are listening to this podcast, then I'm assuming that you might be interested in the entrepreneurial journey. Well, I have good news for you. We have over 300 episodes of the VentureFizz podcast with founders and investors mainly in Boston and New York City. Go to venturefizz.com/podcast to see the full catalog. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe, as we are streaming on all the major platforms like Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and SoundCloud. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Scott. Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you for this podcast. I think it's a long time coming. You and I go way back, and anytime I do homework on a guest before the interview, I just love going down different rabbit holes. And there's so many rabbit holes that we're going to go down talking about your background. I was just like, this is going to be fun. But before we get into your background story, I do want to talk about kind of what's going on in the Boston tech scene. You've got a unique lens because you're a founder building an AI company. You're an investor, you're an advisor. So you kind of have this unique perspective of what's going on in the whole world of AI, specific to the Boston tech scene, because I'm really excited about some of the companies, including yours, that have recently announced funding. There's some good stuff going on. So what's going on?
I think at a high level, I'd say what's going on is, you have these clusters of people who have been successful at previous companies. They tend to be serial entrepreneurs, and they are kind of building new companies with people that they've worked with in the past. And so you really have this diaspora, which is a great foundation for building an amazing ecosystem. And it's sort of, you can reference companies like HubSpot, and you go all the way back to like Ware.com and the PayPal acquisition. And people refer to these as like mafias in the press. You have the PayPal mafia, but in Boston, you might have the Ware mafia. And folks like David Chang and my co-founder Joshua Summers, who came out of those teams. But I think that's what's happening. These are these clusters of really talented people. They're building teams around them. Those teams are becoming successful. Those teams are building clusters. And so I think we're at a really interesting inflection point for Boston, especially as this new wave or this innovation wave around AI, comes to bear. And connecting that back to Boston's roots, being a place where a lot of the innovations in AI sort of were incubated, to places like MIT, Northeastern University, and other universities. So I think what's happening now is you have a lot of these clusters driving innovation, building, and launching new companies. And so it's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great stuff. So you got Maven AGI, that is, HubSpot. There's Day.ai, that's HubSpot alum. You've got 7.ai, which is cybersecurity. So there's just so many great teams coming together that are working on complex problems that they're uniquely qualified to solve with this whole platform shift of AI. So it's super exciting. All right, let's talk about your background. So, um, where did you grow up, and how'd you get involved in the tech industry? Because this is an interesting
So
story.
yeah, and I don't tell this story very often, so it's probably one of the first times I maybe tell it end to end. But I grew up on a farm in Exeter, Rhode Island, so it's sort of off of Route 95, and you're way down to the border of Connecticut. And there's, people always wonder, it's fairly close to, Providence and Boston, and they're like really curious as to what kind of farms would actually exist so close to these larger cities. But it was a really great place to grow up. I grew up in a place where I was expected to do my chores every day, and there was a lot of discipline, but I was also homeschooled, which was like back then something that a lot of kids didn't have exposure to. So I had a lot of interest-led learning. I would get interested in things like video games, and then I'd want to create a video game. And so my journey started with an Apple IIe, especially my journey in tech started with an Apple IIe and just this like burning desire to create video games. And I had the time to do that because I wasn't in kind of a traditional education path. And through that, I got involved in wanting to get my video games out to the world. And at that point in time, the internet didn't really exist, but there were these things called bulletin board services. And these were like highly distributed nodes that you'd use your computer and a modem. I'm dating myself now. To dial up to one of these nodes and upload your files and share them with the community that just accessed that one bulletin board service. But it really taught me a lot about like how you proliferate your tech to communities. And I built my own bulletin board service. I had a bulletin board service called Planet X. It was for sharing video games, that these shareware games that people created. And I have people dial up and download my games. I would go and upload my games to other people's servers. And through that, I got introduced to Andy Green, who was building an internet service provider. And he was a 19-year-old. He was not too much older than I was. And
What
he
year
had
is
a
this,
group of
just for
people around him.
context?
Oh,
Like what year?
1994,
Okay.
93 or 94. Again, really dating myself. It was like right around or after the Gulf War. People started really hearing about, people at that point were receiving like CD-ROMs or discs in the mail, and they were for Prodigy and AOL and these like really historical foundational internet companies. And your alternative was that you could also use your modem to dial up to these bulletin board services. And what Andy was introducing was, well, there's this thing called the internet that a lot of universities have been using for a long time. Let's get people connected to that. And while he was doing that, there were other people starting to think about that as well. But I think he was one of the first ISPs officially in the United States. And I started there as a little, systems engineer hacker who had built a bulletin board service and kind of using my skills as a 15-year-old, part-time. And I also worked alongside a few other like internet, software juggernauts, like, a gentleman named Angus Davis, who started a company called tellme.com. He worked at Netscape, sat right next to me, similar in age, similar kind of like, he was a teenager, interested in coding, interested in the internet.
And this
So
was
there are
at
quite a few people that,
Telecom. This was at Telecom
yeah,
Data
it's that
Service.
telecom data
Angus.
systems. Yeah. So there's an interesting, like, how these early, again, communities of people kind of cluster together because you have similar interests, but it was super early from an internet perspective. But things changed very quickly. I went through, because I was homeschooled, I had, very interest-led learning. I could work at IDS part-time, learn about how the internet was changing. I helped build our first, install disk/CD-ROM to help customers get onboarded, with the service. But things changed very fast. I ended up going up get a computer science degree. I graduated from college, and with that, the desire to be and build video games was still persisting. And I immediately went into a company that was internet focused, called Gamesville.com. And Gainesville.com was run by a founder called Steve Kane and Stu Roseman, and they had founded this company to really build, interactive digital games on the web. And we became one of the highest traffic websites on the internet by 1999, and we were acquired by Lycos, which was the search engine at that time. So you could kind of see how very rapidly I was plugged into the startup ecosystem. And as an engineer, just got really excited how quickly things moved and how you could go from working at a startup, Gainesville.com, building games, to getting acquired by this, like at the time, one of the top 3 search engines in the space, and then be in this bigger company and be building bigger things. And so there was really just an exciting time. That point in the internet was right before the .com crash. And so everything was on the table in terms of what you could create, what you could do. There's a lot of investment flowing through the market. So it was an exciting time. And then the internet crash happened, which was also interesting experience.
But for context, the IDS experience, that was pre-WWW, meaning that was...
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Because with Prodigy, you could enlist the service and you could explore things like buy an airline ticket in the early days, but you weren't exploring the web as we know it now, because it wasn't...
That is correct.
That protocol didn't exist, HTTP. So,
that's
OG stuff. Amazing. And then at Gamesville, so these were, like card games, like it was all online games, but it was, and this was when the acquisition by Lycos happened. That was when Lycos was like one of the major companies in the Boston worldwide. I mean, so Bob Davis was the CEO, and it was the go-go era of Lycos. So what was that like?
That's right. It was amazing. You could walk into kind of like this like high energy, fast, high growth environment. And, there's several hundred people, I think, working for the company at that time. So it was quite a big organization. From we had a cachet. Essentially, I think, and I don't think there's a direct comparison in terms of the type of gaming, but, I think Gainesville was kind of like the DraftKings or of the time. Like it had that similar cachet in the marketplace because we were driving so much traffic to and so much revenue through the system. But it was really exciting to work for Bob Davis and his team. He was, I think, a visionary in terms of like how he brought search into the marketplace. And then we went through an acquisition, became part of a global company called Telefonica through an acquisition. And then the .com bubble happened, which kind of like really kind of reset the landscape quite significantly. But I still think, the companies that survived through that moment in time are some of the biggest companies we have now in the internet landscape.
Yeah, and that acquisition, that was a $12.5 billion acquisition. I mean, it was monstrous. It was, like every headline type of acquisition. It was huge. But yes, then the crash happened. And so what did you do next?
So I went, kind of in a similar to kind of like what I started this call with, like that diaspora, like you kind of run with the same kind of people you trust. I went back to work with Steve Kane at a company called Game Logic. And so this company had a ton of interesting people really trying to innovate, kind of the next phase of gaming, on the internet. And it was really interesting experience because it was more regulated space. We're trying to kind of interface with regulated gaming like lotteries and casinos and try to bring, what DraftKings ultimately did to the market. And we basically wrote a lot of patents. We were probably one of the most prolific IP development shops in the gaming space at that moment in time. I think we're in the top 100 companies in the United States submitting patents at the time. Like if you look up my name and some of the names that people work there, I'm like the 24th most prolific person from a prolific inventor in the Boston area from a patent perspective for that period of time. So it kind of gives you a sense of what we were really doing under the hood.
Right, because a lot of it was ad-based, right? Like the first generation of internet ads, like JavaScript overlay tech type of like. So what was the the patents for?
Well, I think the patents generally were for systems and methods for engaging people online with using games, like gamification, and it's directly connected to the gaming business from a regulated perspective, because we were imagining like connecting these methods to things like online wagering and things that where people are actually spending money to play games online. Um, and we also imagined it being like massive scale. So we were building systems to serve millions and millions of people a day. But we were deploying them through through lotteries and casinos and like these regulated gaming environments. So it had this connection to regulated gaming, but we also imagined making it a lot more fun, a lot more interesting. And so that company iterated through that process and ultimately was acquired by a larger company called Scientific Games. It was one of the larger, gaming operators in the US at the time.
All right, so I remember Game Logic just because I've been in the tech industry for just as long.
Yeah.
And I looked up, I love the Internet Archive Wayback Machine, and I'm like, who was on that team? And Stephen Kane, of course, but Bijan Sabit, Mark Herman, who we're going to talk about. Like the team was phenomenal that came together, and what those people have gone off to do is amazing.
Right. And Mark was was the first co-founder in SessionM, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it was really, it's interesting. You never really know kind of like when you're in it, you're just focused on the mission, right? So when you're doing it with really, really great people, it's a lot easier. And I think it's been so exciting to see what some of the folks from that team have gone off to do. Like Bijan went off and started Spark Capital and was the first investor in Twitter, and a variety of other really exciting companies. And he's now an ambassador to, the Czech Republic, which is like just an amazing, path. Mark Herman, great friend, was the first person to say, "Hey, Scott, let's go start after Game On. Hey, Scott, let's go start a business together. Let's do something." And we went off and started SessionM and met Lars Albright, and that kicked off the SessionM journey. And so I feel like that's where I call it the wolf pack. That's really like you tend to run if you're really thinking about how to create your career as an entrepreneur, and you're one, if you're not, you don't feel like you're ready to start a company, like running with people who know how to do it, you just learn a ton from them. And so I felt like I always called myself the junior entrepreneur, because I was learning a ton from Mark. I was learning a ton from Lars. I was learning a ton from Bijan. And I remember the days Bijan and I would sit down and talk about product strategy all the time. And, you end up learning from those conversations. And again, just to bring this all the way back to what we discussed in the beginning, like this is how a lot of these teams end up, in Boston specifically, founding these additional companies, because these really are tight-knit groups of people who have developed relationships with each other. They trust each other. They have like complementary skill sets, and it's just natural to say, "Hey, let's go solve a problem together. It's an interesting problem to solve." I know Maven AGI has a lot of that in their DNA, and there's quite a few other companies in Boston that do it as well. But from going back to that experience with Game Logic, I think that was the first time I really felt that feeling of like, wow, I'm surrounded with people that I really love to work with, I love to run with, and we could do some really big things together.
But we need to spend some time on a startup before SessionM, SnapYap, which I'm like, what's
Yes.
SnapYap? And once again, Internet Archive hooked me up. I'm like, wait a second, this is video calling over the internet, early Zoom type of vibes. So talk about that.
The SnapYap was interesting, like collaboration with two friends of mine. That was hey, let's start a company together. We didn't quite know what we were going to start. Originally, we wanted to start something in the SMB, helping SMBs digitize themselves, helping SMB. We're taking like our chops from building real-time systems and doing kind of overlay advertising and all these things that we were doing with Gamesville and Game Logic. And these were two engineers that I've worked really, really closely with at Gamesville and Lycos. And like we kind of regrouped and we're like, let's do something interesting with something that's on the cutting edge. And at the time, video was the cutting edge. It was a communications medium that not a lot of people had on their device or on, they used their webcams to do certain things, but really felt, this was right when the iPhone launched. We were like, this device is going to drive a lot of video. So let's try to get ahead of that. And so we imagined, because we were so focused on helping SMBs, we imagined SMBs using videos and video to talk to their customers. And so Snappy App was, sort of a concept around enabling SMBs to plug video into their website so they could literally click a button and say, I want to call and talk to this business owner. I want to have a conversation with customer service and do it through video. And so, yeah, it was I think at this moment in time, maybe there was Skype, maybe Skype existed, gave us maybe a glimpse into the future, but we definitely saw it as short form video. We saw it as quick conversations. We saw it as, and that's why I call it Snappy App, because it would snap into your website and you could talk with whoever is on the other side of that button. We ultimately, didn't work out. We ultimately like moved on from that. But there was a huge learning we got selected by TechCrunch to kind of present at this Boston TechCrunch meetup. And just by getting on TechCrunch, I think we had almost like 500,000 people log into the website. And so that also taught us about, when you do have like market fit for something, or you do have a way of driving interest, that organic kind of the ability to plug in organically with your product and really, really get access to your customers, like one of the most important first steps for a startup. So a lot of startups spend quite a bit of time, working on the product without first like feeling what market fit could look like. And what we found was that while people wanted to try this out and it was really expensive to process the video, we were a bit early on people's ability to use video on their device. And that all changed a couple of years later when Apple started getting more progressive around driving video on the iPhone, and Android got more progressive around driving video features on the iPhone. So we were a bit early, but learned a ton from that experience.
All right. So now SessionM, right? So from what I gathered, because we talked about Mark Herman and the two of you starting a company together. And then once again, like I connected the dots with Bob Davis, who's now a partner or not now, but back then was a partner at Highland Capital Partners, introduced Lars to the two of you. Is that how it all kind of came together as a founding team?
Yeah. Yeah. Mark and I. So what had happened was Mark connected with Bob Davis and said, hey, Scott and I are starting a company. Bob was like, that sounds great. Why don't you guys, use our office space at Highland Capital to just incubate yourself, and we'll give you a conference room. And so super, we didn't have the capital for an office space. It was just one of those moments where yeah, let's do that. And he would check in with us and he would check in on our progress. It was really great to be kind of just plugged in at Highland, almost like entrepreneurs and residents. And, we'd talk with Bob, what does this team need? And so he was like, let me introduce you to people that could help complement this team, maybe some advisors. And so he was really helpful at introducing us to folks. And one of the people he introduced us to was Lars. And I distinctly remember the first time I met Lars, we were at the Naked Fish in Waltham, Massachusetts. We were meeting up for,
I remember that place.
And it was, it's one of those moments where you're just chatting about your product and you're not sure what to think. And we're really kind of looking for an advisor, maybe an investor at that moment in time. And so we really weren't quite sure what the conversation was about. But, Lars, we had learned that Lars was he was working at Apple at the time after the Quattro acquisition. And he was thinking a lot, he was seeing a lot of data on engagement with mobile applications. And he was like, these brands, these businesses that are building these mobile apps, need to be doing more to re-engage their customers, maybe more marketing, more like gamification or more things to engage customers. And we were coming from the angle of we know how to build systems that do that. We know gamification, we know advertising. And there was a bit of a kismet around, there's a problem to solve here. And so fairly quickly, Lars went from hey, I could potentially be an advisor and help you guys out to hey, I want to co-found this with you. And that's what spurred the relationship going forward. And so it was kind of magical. Once we hit the ground running together, it was just a great, the three of us all had complementary skill sets. Like I could focus on engineering, Mark was more product and go to market, and Lars was like CEO, keeping the company funded, brand identity, strategy for go to market, and I think that just really drove SessionM's success. Like, we really focused on revenue. We ramped revenue pretty fast. We also ramped a lot of things pretty fast with a ton of stories around, how to move fast and break things, good and bad. I always tell every founder that I encounter when I'm like advising founders, just sort of like one of your first jobs as a founder is make sure that you can pull together that initial team that's going to complement your skill sets, because you can't do it all alone. And it's a journey, not just a marathon. And you're going to need people at the front, head of the company and the founding company, that founding part of the company that can really drive all the different things that the company needs in order to be successful.
So I think this is when we first met, because I came in, I don't know if this is true or not. I might be making this up, but Craig Driscoll was the recruiting partner at Highland.
I love
And he
Craig. He's
probably,
a great guy.
yeah, yeah. So he probably introduced me to Mark, who was building out a product team. And that's what I was a headhunter focused on product management. So I came into the office and ended up helping him. But I think he introduced me to you, just some other members of the team. And he gave me a demo of the product, which it was the Patriots. And it was, hey, watch this video from the Patriots media team about, Tom Brady or something. And then you earn points by consuming their content that you could then use for maybe a gift card to Panera Bread or something, right? Like, was that the gist of it?
Yeah, the initial incarnation of the company was like, how can we give brands and companies that are building mobile apps the marketing tools to re-engage their customers? And so one version of that was like fan loyalty for sports teams. And so sports teams were rapidly building apps. The first versions of the apps they were building were more these like showcases of the sports team, but they very quickly became transactional. Like the app started to contemplate things like, oh, you can order tickets through the app, or you can check in at the location. And as those things became more transactional, it was an opportunity to build engagement loops around those transactional activities. And so that's what our platform did. It allowed you to build, marketing and engagement loops around those transactional activities. And so the Patriots were a great first partner. They were local. It was like easy to kind of drive down to Foxborough, meet with their team. And I would call them like a design partner to give us a lot of feedback on how to improve the product. And we were really excited, but it was one of those moments where we had to race to develop and deploy because they had a season and we had to deliver the product before their season started or before it ended. And so it kept us honest about what we were building. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, so you ramp up revenue, like you said, very quickly. And from what I gather, it was like tens of millions of dollars. Yet you guys decided to abandon that business. So what prompted that decision, and then where did you head after that?
Yeah, I think we sometimes in the journey to build a venture scale business, you have to be mindful of, like, even though you have revenue, is it the right kind of revenue? And maybe that's answered by like, what are our margins? What's the cost of capital? Like what does it take for us to deliver this revenue? And for us, our business model was designed around, at the time, since app development was fairly nascent, not a lot of brands had fully embraced it yet. We sort of gave our product away for free to app developers. And we got a fair amount of adoption. I think we had a couple hundred apps using the product, and these were top tier mobile app developers, like the Weather Channel, like sports teams, like the New England Patriots, music apps, all sorts of categories. And what we did is we exchanged, the way we made revenue is they gave us their ad inventory. So we were able to sort of use the data about app usage and kind of who was using the app to kind of help optimize our ad inventory. And we had an ad sales team that would go out and like fill that inventory. So we made revenue off of advertising. And we gave the product away for free to developers. The margin on that, at the same time, Twitter and Facebook were flooding a tremendous amount of programmatic advertising into the marketplace. So we ended up being this really boutique mobile advertising network. with these engagement tools and through the lens of those engagement tools. So it was a really interesting hybrid business model that had two sides to it, maybe even three sides. But the margins weren't great, and we were getting crushed on. And so the more we poured into the business around sales team and like trying to grow that, we got to the top line revenue, I think of that time of like 15 or 16 million. We were like edging towards 20. It just wasn't good revenue. It wasn't going to be, we just felt like we were going to kind of plateau at a certain point and be fighting the larger entities out there. So at that same time, Bill Clifford, our CRO, and Lars Albright were on a mission to figure out, is there an alternate strategy? And we got introduced to some fairly progressive brands who were building mobile experiences that had integrated payment, and they needed loyalty solutions. They needed to be able to plug in gamification. And there were maybe some options in the marketplace, but like we had basically an SDK you could drop in and you could layer in engagement in and around transactional things happening in a mobile app. And we found this path towards building a CRM and loyalty platform that was mobile centric to enable brands to extend their loyalty programs to mobile payment. And that really transitioned the business to our new thing. But we had to ramp down that advertising piece. We had to ramp down other parts of the business and ramp up this new part of the business, which was very complicated. So we did it.
And am I making this up? I don't know. Sometimes just thoughts run through my head and I'm like, I don't know if this is true or not. But were you guys involved with the Starbucks app?
Yes, we were involved in building the Starbucks app. So what ended up happening was, and I probably can talk about it now. It's been years since we did this, but when we were doing it, it was highly confidential. But they were looking for gamification solutions to build in and around their mobile app experience. And so we were introduced, I think, to their team through meeting the chief digital officer, and we had showcased what we could do, and we ended up doing a trial of our system for them. And they liked it. And we ended up doing this project around powering different aspects of what they call their bonus campaigns in the Starbucks app. And so that they were using our technology to do that. Meanwhile, we were continuing to build up our capabilities. Like we were now building this like CRM and loyalty platform. We were like extending our capabilities. And ultimately, we were able to work with companies like Starbucks to extend their programs, both domestically and into other regions. So like it was really easy to pick up the SessionM platform and replicate a loyalty program. If you're a business that operated globally, you could do it, cheaper, faster, more efficient by using the entire SessionM platform as a derivative of your loyalty program in another part of the world. And so we actually became, a lot of SessionM's growth came from actually operating not just within the United States, but through these brands, these larger brands, helping them bring their programs to international markets efficiently. And so we ended up doing that with quite a lot of brands, like some of the most recognizable brands in the world were using our platform at a certain point to bring their loyalty constructs from the United States to places as far away as like Indonesia and Malaysia, these, Eastern Europe and the Middle East and other parts of the world. So we very quickly became a global company with teams all over the world through that experience.
Okay, so then the acquisition by Mastercard, how did that come together, and what was life like afterwards?
The company was growing really fast. Like I said, we were moving fast and breaking things. We were growing revenue. We had a really great partnership with a few companies like Salesforce. We were selling to Salesforce customers. We were selling to Oracle customers, and we were really integrating with the marketing and CRM platforms that are out there. So if you were going to do loyalty and you had like the Salesforce Marketing Cloud or the Adobe Marketing Cloud, and like we would go to market with companies that had those products. And we were raising another funding round, and we were trying to think of like, what's the next strategic step in the business? And we had a few companies that approached us with interest to acquire us because they really wanted to own this like loyalty piece to their CRM solution, their cloud solutions. And that forced us to ask the question, like, generally as a founder, if you go down the road of contemplating acquisition, you better be ready to do it, because your mind starts shifting from, hey, we're driving a company, we're building a company, we're raising another round, we're going to grow, we're going to double or triple the company in value, to like, oh, let's sell the company? Huh. And once you go down that path, so we really I remember the distinctive board meeting we had where it was just sort of like, we're either going to go raise or we're going to decide to sell the company. And when we decide to sell the company, we're going to run a process. And so what ended up happening was we're like, well, let's sell the company. And we ran a process. And while running that process, Mastercard became aware of what we were doing in the marketplace, and they threw their hat in the ring in terms of having interest. And we ended up having some really, really great conversations and started to really understand that Mastercard was more, they had other divisions that were focused on serving the same types of companies that we serve with very similar products. And there was like this kismet around building this very loyalty-centric marketing cloud for large merchants that was integrated with payment. And our cultures aligned. We had very, very similar views on where the market was going. We had very similar views on how to grow the loyalty business. And so it started becoming just this natural decision, like when they made an offer to acquire the company, just say yes. And so it was really, I think the decision not just was about, hey, let's go sell the company and go through an acquisition process. It was about how do we partner with a larger company who, when we're working together, helps to accelerate our vision of what we can do with this company. And so I looked at it as like the best funding event that ever happened for the company. And post-acquisition, like we did, and even through the integration process, we integrated SessionM into their loyalty strategy, and they continue to grow the business, to this day. So really, really excited that it kind of had that outcome.
We talked about different, timing of the company, different products, right? A pivot. So looking back at the whole, start to finish, what's your biggest takeaways from, lessons learned from that?
Couple lessons learned as a CTO. You're going to rewrite your software. People talk about technical debt and how to handle technical debt when you're moving fast and breaking things as a company. And there are a couple things I learned. One is you got to be moving at a pace that's efficient enough where you're not afraid of throwing away code. Like code is expensive to write, but you can't be. You have to realize you're going to rewrite your system 3 times before you hit these bigger inflection points as a company. So you don't always be designed for that. Like, engineers try to predict the future. We try to predict the future in terms of how we architect our solutions. As a startup, when you're trying to predict too far ahead, sometimes you can actually build more technical debt than you actually expect. So finding that right balance, the thing I learned over the course of SessionM's journey is finding the right balance allows you to do things like pivot. Like we had a hard pivot, but it enabled us to pivot in a way where we were flexible with it. And there were definitely things I would have done differently now, having gone through that experience in terms of how we built our code base, how we built the team. But I think that was one of my learnings. The other learning after going through it is like you can't anticipate the outcome of the company. You really just have to focus on what you're doing in the world and why you want to do it. I think I meet founders quite a bit who are saying like, hey, I'm going to sell my company in 3 years, and I'm barely skeptical because I'm like, that's not the goal. Yes, you want to be financially secure. You want to have a great outcome. You're an entrepreneur for a reason because you're trying to do the harder thing. But the goal has to be on who you're serving, why you're doing it. And my goal with SessionM was to build a company that was a software technology company that was deeply integrated into global operations for large brands. Like I wanted a platform that was needed and worked with some of the most important information and data and provided great utility to the folks on the other side. So like my purpose was kind of centered around like, yes, that part of the market, that's who we want to be serving. We're going to build tech that works for those types of companies. So that's the other thing I learned is like the mission, the purpose have to be kind of oriented towards the right thing. And then the third thing I learned is like you kind of have to have like an awareness of what I would call productive anxiety. Like as everyone, like we live in a time where it seems like everyone has anxiety. So it's hard for me to say that people who run startups have a lot of anxiety because everyone in every neighborhood across America has anxiety. But like being able to understand what productive anxiety is and how to harness it actually becomes a superpower. You can be nervous about a lot of things. But the one thing you can kind of like use as a catalyst is to recognize like, why am I being motivated by this anxiety and like the tension and like the nerves around Maybe it's a customer launch, or maybe it's getting a feature of the product live. But this is all productive anxiety. Let's build a plan around that. So I think, my message to a lot of founders is focus on identifying the productive anxiety and like responding to it. Do something about it. Don't just let it sit there.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's something that, when I think about with VentureFizz, there's that productive anxiety of running a very lean organization that keeps me constantly thinking. And, you don't waste a lot of time that way. Like you got to have to
Right.
focus on what matters. So when we started the conversation, I was talking about, the Boston startup ecosystem and all the great things happening with the next wave of companies. And I'm excited about, there's teams that are coming together to form companies that are going to be these next generation companies. And you're part of a team. So let's talk about what you're up to now.
Absolutely. So I joined forces with Joshua Summers, who's a four-time entrepreneur, and his most recent company was a company called Clipped that he sold to AT&T. It was the data platform for linear television. He built and ran a great team there, and he and I had been co-investing with a group called TBD Angels. It's an angel investment group, and so after I'd left Mastercard, I was dabbling in some investments. Or after the SessionM acquisition, I was doing some angel advising and angel investments on the side. And I met Josh, and we really kicked it off. And so when the Silicon Valley Bank collapse happened, we had quite a few of our angel portfolio companies scrambling to move their assets. Like, you don't want to be the last person in a bank run. You don't want to be the first. And so we were helping a couple founders figure out how to move their assets. And the ones that held venture debt were kind of stuck because they have these covenants and they can't break those covenants with the bank. And so we were helping them try to find new sources of venture debt and maybe try to move that venture debt. And we found that there's a lot of friction, a lot of time spent to issue a venture debt line of credit to a startup. And a lot of it's because of it's difficult to assess the risk associated with that loan. And so that forced Josh and I like to really zoom into like, well, as a technologist, I was like, well, can we automate it? Like, can we make it faster? The other piece is like being on the borrower side of a startup, like it's not very clear if I'm in the running to get the loan. Like when you go for a car loan, you can, in a couple of clicks, you can get, some quotes. With venture debt or these other types of commercial loans that we call it complex credit. It's a little unclear whether or not you're truly qualified until later on in the relationship. So we felt like, one, there could be a better borrower experience for complex credit, and two, we could really speed up and automate the process. So what we did, and I'll probably connect this back to your question before, maybe what would you have done differently at SessionM? The first thing we did, back in November of last year was start talking to subject matter experts in the industry. And so we did everything we could to get connected to chief credit officers, CEOs of banks, CEOs of private credit institutions, and really dive into this problem. And we almost tried to disprove we should start a company. Like, tell us we shouldn't do this. We think this process around commercial credit and complex lending is really laborious and takes too long. And then assessing risk is really hard. And like we kept validating that. So we went through this customer discovery process really early to try to prove that there could be market fit around this thesis. And we learned a lot. And coming out of that, we were like, let's start a company because we got such great positive feedback on very specific use cases that we felt like we could go build. And some of the use cases are fairly complex. Like we actually have to train our own AI models to solve some of these use cases. But ultimately, on the other side of that, we started moving faster to create this company we call EnFi, ENFI, Enhanced Neural Financial Intelligence. And so we are 100% focused on the question of risk when it comes to complex financial instruments and assisting in those workflows. And we're going to use AI, and we do use AI to sort of solve that problem. We can speed up the process of reading financial data and assessing the quality of that financial data from any borrower. And then we can connect that into how to evaluate risk on an ongoing basis in real time, where today it happens, in much more of a batch-oriented process, a quarterly or yearly cadence. And we're really going to improve not only the borrower experience, but really improve the experience for the institutions themselves. Josh and I are serial entrepreneurs. There's a lot of things that we obsess over. around wanting to get right, making sure we have the right people on the proverbial bus early. We've been hiring some really great talent, researchers, full stack engineers, subject matter experts from the industry, but we're also being cautious to make sure we have the runway we need in order to achieve our goals. And we have a few customers that we call design partners, and this year we're focused on we're launching actually our closed beta on July 1st. We have a couple customers lined up that are going to start using that closed beta, and this year we're just going to run a closed beta. We're going to learn as much as we can about product market fit and how the product is working. And then start to open it up when we feel really confident that it's working as we expect it to work.
Well, you recently announced a seed round of funding, $7.5 million. So talk about, your investors and kind of, whatever else is the latest with the company.
We have a great group of investors. We feel really humbled by the amount of attention we had to our funding round. We went out to a group of people. I originally, so one of the key investors is my co-founder, Lars Albright. He's a partner now in Unusual Ventures. And we really didn't approach him to invest the company. We really approached him around the idea, like, hey, what do you think? Do you have any feedback? And what's unique about Unusual Ventures, they have a very special way of working with entrepreneurs to really kind of hone in on product market fit first and really understand, is there something here and is it going to be a category leader? And we kind of got really excited about that. And the more Lars started working with us, the more we were felt like we wanted to, have the opportunity to pitch them. So we, given that relationship, we had an early opportunity to pitch them, and they were excited about coming in on the round. And it did take a while for us to figure out how much we wanted to raise and what that really meant. Meanwhile, we were talking to a lot of other firms in Boston around that had a view on either AI or financial services. And so we ended up closing the round with Unusual Ventures leading. And then we have a bunch of other really great VC firms like Boston Seed Capital, Argon Ventures, which is a new AI focused hard tech fund. And we also, another co-investor is Impellant Ventures, who is really excited about investing in businesses that are kind of not necessarily in the Silicon Valleys of the world, right? So they're investing in businesses that might be doing it a little differently in terms of location or people or business model. So overall, we're so humbled to have this team that we've assembled, a great group of just. I think the characteristic for each one of these funds is they're run by founders. Every one of these funds are run by former founders, and that's something that we find really special about the group of investors that we've partnered with.
Now you mentioned kind of the latest with the company as far as, hey, we're gonna July 1st, we'll be doing our closed beta. What's your plan in terms of growing the team? You mentioned you've been adding some key team members. Is that going to be adding some additional people, or is it, hey, the rest of this year we're just in product development mode?
Yeah, we built an initial team, and now that we've raised money, we're actually adding to that team. We are also doing some additional things we're partnering with universities like Northeastern University to bring on some co-op students, some master program co-op students. And so we have I would say initial research team, AI research team that we're building, led by a really fantastic PhD level AI researcher. We have a great kind of core engineering team that we're building out that is just focused on making sure we can build solid, secure, scalable systems for the financial services industry. We also have a team of what I call analysts and subject matter expertise. These are people who have been there and done it at these financial institutions, who are fed up with how it's done and really want to be part of EnFi to fix it. I think we'll continue to add to that team, and there will be a certain point this year where we'll kind of hit, our stride with hiring and maybe just be more opportunistic. We're very obsessed with runway and making sure we have the right runway to succeed. But I would expect maybe we'd be double in size by this time of next year. If we were on plan and we're doing the things that we said we were going to do, and we'd be very excited. And so that'd probably be 35, 40 people, and we'd be, on our way. So we definitely we're looking for talent. If there's any people out there interested in what we're doing, we'd love to hear from them, especially if they've lived the pain within a financial services institution. Would love to talk to them.
All right. So, looking at the past and as an investor, starting companies, building them, having an exit, starting another company, right? So, and then you've seen lots of companies through your investments. Like, what are the like common mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make, time and time again?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there are some patterns out there starting to emerge, and I always like to tell people when I'm advising them to not really listen to anything I say, as an instruction. Oh, treat it as a story. These are my stories on how I really messed things up, and maybe you can avoid that. So I like to but I do start observing patterns. Like, I think some of the patterns are not. I think there's a couple. One is overvaluing your company. I think like having a really strong and balanced point of view on what your company's worth and how much equity you probably have to give away early on to bring the right team around the table is really critical. I see some founders try to preserve, there's a couple things you can trade early on in the company to get capital. And one of them is equity, one of them is ownership. And like, I think you have to take a really balanced approach because a number like second to that concern is like your ability to build the right team. Investors are part of the team, and so are your early co-founders or your early executive team. So I think one is like having a really balanced view on what the company's worth and how much you have to spend to go get the right team. The other one is getting the right team, surrounding yourself early with complementary skill sets and making sure that everyone has a clear directive on what their role and responsibility is. I see a lot of founders that might be co-CEOs or they're trying to figure it out. We're not quite sure yet who does what. That really affects the ability to execute and understand, what swim lanes people are operating in. I think that was one of the magical things we had early on at SessionM, and that's one of the things that we have here at EnFi is like I really know what my co-founders are doing in the business. Like I know what I'm responsible for, and we're just like let's execute. So I always get concerned when I see founders struggling when there isn't a lot of clarity around role. And the other piece is like working with great people like you to go find talent and the talent that matters and really having a balanced view of like, what are the right skill sets? How do we find the best people to be working with you? I think a lot of founders, struggle to find talent, whether it's their co-founder that they're trying to find or it's like the earliest employees and it's not a failure on their side. It's just a struggle. It's just hard to do. So that's the other piece too, is like partnering with the right people to help you find talent is an accelerant as well early on.
All right. So, top three apps you can't live without. Can't be Slack, can't be your calendar or Gmail.
Oh, it's funny. It's can't be calendar, can't be Slack, can't be Gmail. I would say the Chipotle app. I cannot live without the Chipotle app. My entire family loves Chipotle. I order it once or twice a week. It's like a go-to. It's probably the Starbucks app is right in there in that category too. Like, if you're a commuter and you like Starbucks, like I just put my order in, I show up, I get my coffee, like, and these are near and dear to my heart because these are companies we worked with. So it was like, you'd be able to see like that whole, digitization of that market live on. But we really use those apps all the time. I'd say another app that I use quite a bit is, I use Anthropic. Anthropic's latest models are quite helpful when it comes like to do things like I'm thinking about this idea, give me the provide me with generalized knowledge on this idea, like be my like almost like my thought guide on how to explore this concept. And so as a founder, you're often being like asking yourself like what ifs, like what's the right approach to PR and marketing for an early stage startup now? Or what should we be thinking about in terms of talent discovery or any creative ideas for like how we think about like rethinking how we build culture? Like I have my perspective, all my failings and successes from the past, mostly failings, but you have, what should we be doing now? So I do actually use ChatGPT and Anthropic and these other models quite a bit around discovery. And I almost use them every day when I just have a question or there's something to do. And I think it's becoming more and more part of my daily habit.
All right. So, how about like podcast, book recommendations for entrepreneurs?
Oh, I'd say Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. It's an easy read. And it's like, I think it gives you a lot of perspective on how you could build an organization that really unlocks everyone's like hidden potentials. Like everyone has their intellectual potential and their potential from an ability to learn and grow, et cetera. But like as a leader, you really need to know like how to unlock that. And the flip side of that is how to not get in their way. And so that book was, I'll say, really inspiring for me because I think in my journey of trying to create, companies, specifically SessionM, you're moving so fast. There's a lot of diminishing activities you could do that like prevent people from realizing their first potential. You don't even realize that. You're like just an accidental diminisher. And you're preventing from actually like, understanding how to work through challenges. And so I think it was a really, really, really great book for me. And I think I tend to share it with a lot of leaders that I know and be like, hey, maybe this will give you a superpower in terms of getting the best out of your team.
All right, outside of work, what do you like to do?
So I am learning how. So basically, I'm working on my what's called a six-pack license. It's the ability to take a group of six people out on a boat, to go fishing or fishing charter. So I'm like really interested in sailing and boating and just getting kind of more officially licensed. Maybe that's my like retirement career someday. I brew beer on the side. I like I think. You could probably throw a stone in Boston and hit an IT or a software developer that brews beer. I think it's like a pretty common thing, but I really enjoy doing it. It's like very creative. It's a cross between science and a creative activity. And then I do long distance cycling. I'll do like 300-mile bike rides. There's a group here in the Boston suburbs called Team Psycho that bike from Bedford, Massachusetts to Aquila Mountain every year, or to some place in Vermont every year. And it's like a really fun but grueling ride. So I was like preparing for that. So those are my three passions, and my family and I have a growing family and I have two teenagers, and like they're doing teenager things, and then my wife and I spend a lot of time just sort of making sure they get what they need, and that we're present in their lives. So
Very
yeah.
cool. Well, Scott, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story, all the great stories as far as the companies that you've been a part of and built, and obviously what the team is up to now, and obviously all the great advice.
No, thank you so much, Keith, for the opportunity. And really wishing you a ton of success, and hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.